Now we ready?
No.
My sign says it's now streaming live on Facebook.
Now I think we're ready.
Thank you. Take 3. Welcome to the Caucus of African American Leaders meeting. Tonight we have a very provocative and hopefully informative meeting. The year was 1955. The victim was a man by the name of Emmett Till. He was a 14-year-old Black boy who was killed in Money, Mississippi. 65 years ago, when he was murdered by white bigots, it inflamed the African American community. It also energized that community. That became the tipping point for a new civil rights movement. 65 years later, a man by the name of George Floyd finds himself a victim of what many believe to be police brutality and racism. The fact of the matter is that racism is not new. Police brutality is not new. What is new is a determined community who've gotten together to put an end to this ongoing violence. When we think of the case of George Floyd, we often think of a case that involves somebody in a place called Annapolis, Minnesota. When we think of Michael Brown, we think of a case that involved somebody in Ferguson, Missouri. When we think of Freddie Gray, we think about somebody named Freddie Gray in Baltimore, Maryland. What we don't think about is the cases we've had locally in Anne Arundel County, which over the years have had similar results, where people believe they have not gotten a fair and just verdict. Here's just 3 examples of cases that occurred in 1990 in Anne Arundel County. Many people have forgotten these cases because they did not get the national attention that others have gotten. One case involved a young man by the name of Cochise Daltrey. He was 18 years old. He was shot and killed in Robinwood in the Annapolis community. At the time of his death, there was great controversy. No one was ever prosecuted for his murder. Crystal B. Nelson was a pregnant Black woman living in a community called Mead Village in 1990. In her case, she was shot by a police officer. She was 26 years old. At the time, there was great controversy concerning that shooting. No one was ever prosecuted for her. And then there's that infamous case involving another man who was 54 years old, who was a Maryland state employee. His name was Leroy Perry. He was shot on Ritchie Highway while going in the back of his trunk to unlock it with a screwdriver. The police officer who shot and killed him was not prosecuted. And in that case, Anne Arundel County actually paid his attorney's fees. These cases are cases that when you think about it and you look back on it, you know that people were visibly angry, but they've been forgotten. And that's not something that does not often happen. Many times you have controversial cases, controversial shootings, and they're soon forgotten, lost to history, lost to the memory, lost to the family members who lost their loved ones. What George Floyd's case has done is brought back to the public's attention, the need for us to focus on creating a system where people do not die. So in the first segment, we have 2 segments and they're divided as such. In the first segment, we'll have the county executive and the mayor. And in this segment, what they will do is tell us what their administrations are specifically doing to eliminate racism locally. They will be then questioned by members of the panel, and that will go for about an hour. We'll also take questions from the public. If you're on Facebook and you have a question for the mayor or the county executive, please post it. We'll try to get to answering it. After the county executive and the mayor has finished their presentation, the second hour will be for community leaders to look at how they believe this problem of racism can be addressed. We've invited the mayor and the county executive to be on the first portion. We know they have a busy schedule. If they're able to stay with us, great. If not, we will understand. There will be other elected officials who are joining us either by Facebook or by Zoom. These elected officials have decided to join us because they want to hear what people in the community believe will solve this problem, as well as what our elected officials are doing to address the problem. So with no further ado, we start our meeting off by inviting both of our guests for being with us in the first segment. We always start off our program by having a welcome, and the welcome will be given by the president of the Anne Arundel County NAACP, Jacqueline Boone Alsop. Jackie?
Thank you, Carl. The topic for this meeting, for this evening is, how do we stop? How do we stop? Can racism be stopped? This systemic problem has been in existence all of my life. This is an issue in the forefront of most of our leaders' minds. While we are living in these unprecedented times, the NAACP will continue to work to protect the most vulnerable in our society. During this time, the fight to defend our civil and human rights has never been more critical. We've all been a bystander at one time or another. It can be uncomfortable. Often people don't respond because they don't want to get involved, or they may think that they will be a target. Standing up for racism can be a powerful sign of support. It can also make the perpetrator think twice about their actions. So today, this meeting is sponsored by the United Black Clergy, Connecting the Dots, Community Actively Seeking Transparency, Caucus of African American Leaders, March on Maryland, and the Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP. And we welcome you.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and thank all of the people who joined in, who are viewing. As I indicated in the introduction, this is about a very tragic case that have caught the attention of the world. We're going to take 30 seconds, and I'd ask everybody to mute their phones, and for the next 30 seconds, let us reflect on the life and now the legacy of George Floyd. Thank you. Our first speaker will be the mayor of the city of Annapolis, Mayor Gavin Buckley, who's serving in his first term of mayor. In 2000, 3 years ago, I should say, when he ran for mayor, he ran under one banner, one Annapolis. His vision was for an Annapolis that would be inclusive, an Annapolis that would be an Annapolis open to all people. 3 years later, he's moved to his fourth year. He's able to tell us some of the accomplishments he's made and his vision for the future. Mr. Mayor, we'd like you to take the time that's been allocated to you to talk about what your administration is specifically doing to address the problem of racism within the city of Annapolis. Mr. Mayor.
So I've got a few prepared things, and I'd like to talk. It's only been a little over two years, Carl, not 3 years. Feels like that. So hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. It has been a tumultuous few weeks in Annapolis, in Arundel County, and in our country and around the world. We are living through a very unusual time. The pandemic had us all staying home and struggling as businesses and schools were shuttered for nearly 3 months. While we were sheltering in place, we played witness to 3 horrific killings of African Americans, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. They are just the latest victims of this racial injustice. Next, we watched people pour into the streets to demand change. Every night for the past 2 weeks, we have seen demonstrations, protests, and vigils where everyday Americans demand the next part of the American story looks drastically different. As a mayor, this demand for change from people who look like you, standing along people who look like me, is what America has needed for a long time. We are all in this together. I'd like to now read a resolution that the Annapolis City Council unanimously passed last night during our nearly 14-hour budget meeting. If anyone was lucky enough to be there for 14 hours, I'm sorry. The resolution reads, it is a resolution concerning George Floyd. For the purpose of memorializing this tragedy as a point in time when the City Council urges the citizens of Annapolis to join hands with their city officials and civic leaders in committing to each other that violent and disrespectful treatment that degrades dignity and disregards human life will not be tolerated. Whereas on June 18th, 2018, the City Council unanimously adopted this resolution to express its support of Equal Justice Initiative to move toward a more complete history of race relations and to affirm the city's commitment to truth, freedom, and equity. Whereas on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd, an African-American man, died at the hands of 4 Minneapolis, Minnesota police officers. And whereas, according to reports, one of these officers held his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, 2 minutes and 53 seconds of which occurred after Mr. Floyd became unresponsive. And according to criminal complaints filed against the officer, Mr. Floyd was handcuffed and laying prone on the road throughout that time. 3 other officers participated in this death, with one holding Mr. Floyd's back, one holding his legs, and the 4th looking on as he stood nearby. According to the Minneapolis Fire Department, paramedics moved Mr. Floyd from the location and were doing chest compressions and other life-saving measures on an unresponsive, pulseless male. After which time, Mr. Floyd was taken to Hennepin County Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. The family autopsy stated asphyxiation from sustained pressure was the cause of Mr. Floyd's death. And whereas the officer who held his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck was arrested on May 29th, 2020, and faces charges for second-degree murder and manslaughter, according to the Hennepin County Attorney. And as of this writing, the other 3 officers will be criminally charged, but actual charges are not known, according to Senator Amy Klobuchar. And whereas our local public leaders have spoken out as follows. I said, no one should suffer such brutality. Our hearts go to the family of Mr. Floyd and to the people of Minneapolis. Annapolis shares your struggle for justice. Anne Arundel County Health Officer Nilesh Kalyanaraman. Silence is the space in which injustice grows. We must all speak up when we see injustice, particularly when we are not the target of that injustice. Anne Arundel County Police Chief Tim Altamari. We are united today to condemn the trash we saw on that video and to urge people in Anne Arundel County to keep talking, keep caring, and to do things the right way in a healthy manner. Human life matters. We exist to protect. Annapolis Police Chief Edward Jackson. Let us all work together in the city of Annapolis and become the model agency that the nation can emulate. Anne Arundel County Executive Steuart Pittman. I encourage every white adult of privilege to watch that video. And when you do, imagine that Mr. George Floyd, the victim trapped under the knee of that officer, was your brother. And when you're done, I encourage you to take a deep breath, set your jaw, and pledge to push back for the rest of the waking hours of your life against every wedge driven by hate, fear, and racism between the people of this country. Anne Arundel County School Superintendent George Arlotto. The frustration and pain felt by so many is fully justified. However, we must channel this emotion towards kindness and acceptance and inclusion we all desire to see in each other, and which we as a school system seek to impart on our students every day. Only by doing that can we build our community up and not tear it down. Anne Arundel County branch of the NAACP, President Jackie Boone Alsop. This moment calls for us to unite around the outrage we feel and fight for justice we demand. Now is a time to stand up and speak out as we guide our communities and our nation to the right side of justice. Carl Snowden, Caucus of African American Leaders. People reach a point where enough is enough. And I'm telling people as clearly as I can that we are at that point. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Annapolis City Council that the City Council first and foremost extends its condolences to the family of George Floyd. And be it further resolved by the Annapolis City Council that the City Council recognizes that we all come from a common thread as a single human race, and call on our country to recognize the value of human life. And be it further resolved by the Annapolis City Council that the City Council fully supports and strongly endorses peaceful unification throughout this country, opposing this and similar deplorable acts of violence against persons of color and those of different ethnicity, religion, beliefs, or expression, both now and in perpetuity. And be it therefore resolved by the Annapolis City Council that the City Council supports that all steps should be taken, including an independent investigation to bring those involved in Mr. Floyd's death to justice. And be it therefore resolved by the Annapolis City Council that the City Council encourages all Annapolis residents to take this time to employ our human capacity for compassion in continuance of further racial equity in our community. And be it therefore further resolved by the Annapolis City Council that City Council calls upon our community to join with us in committing to introspective evaluation of ourselves as public servants, citizens, and as brothers and sisters regarding this event. And be it therefore further resolved by the Annapolis City Council that the City Council commits to our community that our organization does not and will not tolerate or accept in any way the violent or disrespectful treatment of others that degrades dignity and disregards human life, for we are one Annapolis. Thank you. That was Alderwoman Ellie Tierney's resolution that was passed. Carl, I open it up to questions or?
Well, what we're going to do, Mr. Mayor, is we're going to have the county executive speak following you, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Thank you for your presentation. County Executive Steuart Pittman is in his first term as county executive. He ran on, or has now adopted a slogan, Anne Arundel County, the best place for all. County Executive Pittman, will you share with the viewing audience your administration's goals as it relates to how do we stop racism in Anne Arundel County?
Yeah. Thank you, Carl. Thank you for everybody who keeps coming back month after month after month after month to the Caucus of African American Leaders meetings in person and now online. I've got to say that we're very lucky in Anne Arundel County that that this organization exists and holds people like me accountable. Helps people like me get elected, but then holds people like me accountable. I guess, you mentioned earlier, you asked me to talk about what we've done, and I'll do that, but I feel like it's hollow at this point. It seems like ancient history, and because we know it's not enough. And so I don't feel like bragging about anything right now. What I feel is shame. Shame that this country has failed to heal the greatest wound, the greatest sin, the sin of racial discrimination that's gone on and on and on from 400 years, most of that time under the enslavement of Black Americans who built this county. And then the incarceration of Black Americans in huge numbers, and the creation of an economic system that has kept Black Americans from achieving their rightful place in this country. But I'll go through a few things that we've done, and I will go through some of our goals, and I will go through some of what I hope to achieve as a result of the movement that is on the streets right now, the movement that I was proud to participate in on Sunday twice, and I'll be back, as I'm sure many of you will be back, because this is our chance to do something for this country and this community that is long overdue. It seems like a long time ago we got that fair housing bill passed. People hit the streets, they went to the council, they got it done. Our workforce housing bill created the Human Relations Commission, recreated it, I should say, with more power. I met with the Human Relations Commission last week for an emergency meeting, and good news is they want more power. They want more authority to have subpoena power on more than just housing. And so we're back at the table working on that. But it was that Human Relations Commission that pulled together the Hate, Bias, and Crimes Forum back in February at Anne Arundel Community College. Hundreds of people came, and it felt like we were facing our weaknesses in our county. And that was in response to Anne Arundel County having the highest number of hate bias incidents reported to Maryland State Police of any county in the state of Maryland. And if you did it per capita, we'd be even higher. So it was a wake-up call, and the Human Relations Commission stepped up. We changed our slogan. We put signs up that said "for all," not just the best place for all, the same words that end the Pledge of Allegiance, liberty and justice for all. But, slogans are slogans, and they don't always change behavior. We thought teaching history was a good way to go, and I still think it is. And, the Four Rivers Heritage Area African American History Tour online, the presentation of that was a big step forward. Funding the Wiley Bates Legacy Center last year's budget at the last minute, big step forward, be able to hire some staff there. When the Equal Justice Initiative and some county residents got together, and hundreds and hundreds gathered in what we're about to change the name of Whitmore Park to People's Park, dedicated to the residents of the old Fourth Ward. That was a moment that felt like we were confronting the racism and the history of the lynchings in our county. We said that racism was a mental health crisis, and we created the Office of Health Equity and Racial Justice in our budget. And our new health officer was the first, and I think at this point the only county in Maryland who's set up a health equity initiative related to coronavirus, and the only county that has among the metrics that we need to accomplish to be able to reopen our health equity measures, because the impact of the virus is so much higher on Black and brown residents of our county. And then I said from the beginning, 18 months ago, that we needed body cameras on our police officers. And I talked to a lot of people about that. I got to say, the moment that I decided that we had to do that was when I watched that film, The 13th, about incarceration of Black Americans post-slavery to today. And I had to put myself in the position of somebody, if I had been born Black, how my life would have changed. And that was what I was thinking when I watched that movie. And then when people started telling me why people don't trust the police, why people fear being pulled over by a cop, especially at night, body worn cameras just seemed like common sense. The transparency, that little bit of a feeling that somebody's watching, somebody will be able to see what actually happens, is a feeling of security. So I take all of the blame for failing, after saying that I intended to put that in the budget, not putting it into my budget proposal. When we found that we were going to have $63 million less than we thought. And it seemed that there was not much pressure, not much political support. It just seemed like it was going to have to wait another year. And then when George Floyd was murdered, tortured, brutally murdered, like a lynching, on Minneapolis streets for the world to see, it didn't take long for NAACP Youth and College Division to mobilize and generate emails to me, 330 at least. And every single one of those emails was individually written by a young person from the heart, a lot of them with personal experience, demanding body-worn cameras. And it didn't take long for us to decide and for the council to let us know that they would support it if we got it in as a supplemental budget request. It went in, and I believe that the budget will pass on Friday with $1.8 million transferred from our CAO contingency fund into the first year of body cameras. It'll be 11 to 14 million over the next 5 years to hire the 18 people that it'll take to run the program. But every single sworn officer will have a body-worn camera. And we will move that forward in terms of the bidding from the companies to get that done as quickly as possible, on a fast track. But still, that's just not enough. And I've done a lot of reading in the last 4 or 5 days about policing. I got a letter from NAACP about the need for a serious incident response board or civilian review board to get more community input, community engagement, oversight of the decisions that get made when there's use of force or when there is a charge of discrimination or bad policing. So I read the report, President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force report. I asked Chief Altamari to put together a response on what they had implemented. There is, the Human Relations Commission had a series of questions as well. And if you go to the police department's website, or I believe on their Facebook page, there's a link to about 8 pages worth of information that's worth reading about how our police department has responded to that. But my view is that we need to start over again, and we need to take a look from the top to the bottom of our policing. And as a community, we need to look at what's worked, what we've done well, and where we failed. And that includes de-escalation training, use of chokeholds, intervention by officers when another officer is violating guidelines, regulations, what our use of force standards are, warning before firing, screening of recruits, minority hiring, personnel early warning systems when officers have had complaints filed against them too many times, in-service training, and community review, looking at what we do with our community relations boards in each district, and our citizens advisory committee, and our deadly force review board, which is not adequate, and it needs to be broadened, and it needs to have more community participation. So we have to put together a process, and I've talked in my office with staff about this just in the last few days, and I don't want to announce the process without getting people's ideas about what the process should look like. Do we do this through the Human Relations Commission? Should it be the county executive's office and our community engagement and constituent service staff? Should it be some combination? Should it be some group that we appoint from the community? How do we engage the young people that have spoken out and led the marches and spoken out so eloquently and are going to be dealing with whatever changes we make for the rest of their lives? So we are going to review our policing in the county. We're going to do it with the community in the way that I've tried to do other major initiatives in my administration. And I need your input in how we go about that, because we don't have a lot of opportunities to do this. And this is the historical moment where we can make real change. But I don't want to stop there. And I just want to say that this moment is much bigger than what that arm of government does. The police department is an agent of government, but it's the decisions that have been made by government for decades and even centuries, but I think, even in recent decades, have been through the lens of wealth accumulation. It's been all about what can we do to make sure that the wealthiest Americans become wealthier, that the largest corporations make bigger profits. And the theory was always that it would trickle down and that it would benefit everybody. But we've been left with housing crisis. We don't have housing affordable for the people in our county. The opportunity gap in schools is not getting any better. We need recreation programs for youth. We need job training. We need income. We need a minimum wage that's $15 at least. And we have lobbyists now telling the state that we can't afford to go to 15 because of the coronavirus, and we have to fight back on that. So instead of this wealth accumulation lens, we need to be looking at everything through a racial equity lens. And even the Maryland Association of Counties is now talking about that. I went to a conference about that. And when we move in that direction, I really do believe that we can shift the lens, shift the way we do public policy, and really deliver on a lot of the promises that this country made that it failed to achieve. And the last thing I want to say is that, my role in all of this is, I hope to be an agent of change. No different than when I was a community organizer, no different from all of you, that I don't have the power to win on all of these things. I have the power to help win, just like you do. And so I don't ask you to trust me to deliver. I want you to hold me accountable, just like you need to hold each other accountable. We all need to hold each other accountable to a high standard of justice and justice for all. And we need to be able to say the difficult things to say. We need to be able to say, as a county executive who oversees a police department, I need to say, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter.
Thank you. On that note, I'm going to interject because I think that's a good way to segue in to the questions that we have. And there are a number of questions that people have. And we'll start off with Dee Goodwin, who's representing Cal. She has the first question, and that question is directed at our Mayor Buckley. Dee?
Yes. Thank you, County Executive. and Mayor Buckley for attending our meeting this evening. And thank you for your presentations. As Carl said, my question is directed to Mayor Buckley. So we know that racism is an ongoing pandemic, but my specific question today is regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. So, Mayor, I noticed that in today's Capital Gazette, there's an article regarding the Anne Arundel County Department of Health recommending COVID-19 testing for anyone who has gone to a recent protest. Now, I know that there have been numerous rallies and vigils and protests here in Annapolis, where Annapolis police officers have attended while working. What I've also noticed is that the Anne Arundel County police officers have also attended protests and such. And I've noticed that they wear facial masks and they comply with the 6-foot social distancing rules, whereas the Annapolis City police officers have not been seen wearing their mask while confronting others and are not practicing social distancing. Now, on March the 15th, you had signed a declaration of state of emergency where you had written the health, safety, and security for City of Annapolis residents, visitors, and city staff are paramount importance right now. So would you please explain to us why the Annapolis police officers are not complying with the CDC rules?
Mr. Mayor.
Yep. So they are supposed to. So they all have masks on them. I had 100 of these printed for our officers. They all have these. If they're not wearing them in those situations where they're 6 feet away from someone, then we have to ask that question. So I will find out why that is. In the events that I've been to, whenever there's been close proximity of officers, I've seen masks. On occasions, I haven't seen them when they're close to people. I haven't seen them without them, you know, when they're around their cars and stuff like that. So yeah, we have to, you know, we have to lead by example. And if they're not doing the right thing, then there has to be some repercussions. So I will get together with a police chief on that. If you're noticing it, then we are failing. So I can say on the testing and the COVID stuff that we made sure that we brought resources to communities with our health department and with the county. We, with Kevin Simmons and our Office of Emergency Management, we made sure that we tried to bring the testing to people who aren't lucky enough to be able to drive a car out to a testing site. At the health department, we pushed that, and we have managed to have those testing sites all throughout the city. And every time that we had that initiative, we used up every single test kit that we were allowed to have. Now, remember early on, for all of us, it's been so hard to get the test kits, but we realized that you have to bring the resources to the communities that need them most. And I'm proud of the work we did on that.
Thank you. Before I go to the next question there, I want to remind people, we got a lot of people who got a lot of questions they want to ask. Please ask your questions as succinctly as you can. And if the respondents, the mayor and the county executive, would do the same, we'll be able to get a lot more responses in this first segment. The next question comes from Thornell Jones, and it's directed at both the mayor and the county executive. Thornell, what's your question? Thornell?
Did you Mike?
Thornell needs to unmute.
Thornell?
Need to.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Okay, sir. What is your question to the county executive and the mayor?
We need a big fix to overcome the inequalities in many areas of our lives, including education, which is the fundamental glue of our society. Annapolis is at a serious disadvantage because it does not control its schools. The blueprint from Maryland is the one major factor that can bring about great change in the lives of all Marylanders, especially those who lack 21st century skills today. What are the two of you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. County Executive, doing to ensure the backbone of the big fix, the blueprint for Maryland, is implemented immediately?
Thank you. We'll start with the county executive and then have the mayor answer that question. Blueprint for Maryland, how are you supporting it?
I am expressing my disgust with the governor's decision to veto the blueprint. When I testified on the blueprint in the General Assembly, I was very clear that the governor's decision to raise money at the casino with very expensive tables to the wealthiest people in the state to fight against funding for public education was a disgrace. I've lobbied for it. We just have to keep on fighting for it. And I just hope we got to push the legislature to come back and override that veto. It's not a money issue because the bill passed with an escape hatch so that if revenues decreased, they would postpone the funding. So he calls it a budget issue. It's not a budget issue. This is the only way we're going to achieve. We started this opportunity gap. I won't talk too long. Sorry, Carl. The opportunity gap task force. And if we're going to deliver, we need support from the state. We can't go it alone. We're going to go it alone if we have to. But it makes my blood boil that he vetoed that, Governor Hogan.
Thank you. Mayor Buckley, same question.
County Executive Pittman, we desperately need that. We need funding in education. It is the ultimate road to success for anyone. Not only is education the key to a better life, but housing, transportation, all these sorts of things have to be a priority for us. It's a priority for this city. My kids at Annapolis High, I want that funding to be there. And I've campaigned on this. We have failed. Our school system almost reflects the prison system. There's Latinos and African Americans and whites. It's not. It's a failure, and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to invest in it and change it because it is not working right now.
Thank you, sir. The next question comes from Cass Reverend Morris. Who's your question directed to, and would you just state it succinctly?
Yes, my question is for Executive Pittman, but I want to thank you both for your compassion and vision on today. My question is specific about actionable items. And I want to first add also that when we have these conversations about specifics, I'd really like to be a part of that conversation. So my question is as follows. This morning, Executive Pittman, you were sent video clips of various citizens affected by bad policing in the county. You also sent a video of a former Anne Arundel County prosecutor and assistant state's attorney, videotape narrative of police being untruthful, the alleged bias present within that office at that time. And she herself alleges persons in Freetown, Pioneer City, and Mead Village were subjected to beside the road illegal body cavity searches. This was brought to your attention before and dismissed. I believe you may have said something about the police or someone said it wasn't true. So now that you have seen the credentials of the person making these allegations, what are your thoughts about how that can be handled?
Thank you. County Exec?
So if I saw evidence that police were doing body cavity searches on anybody on the side of the road or anybody anywhere, and our police chief wasn't willing to confront it and wasn't willing to do it, the first step would be to fire the police chief. That's what I have the power to do, and that's what I would do.
Period.
I'm waiting for the evidence of any body cavity searches. I saw your email this morning. I did not look at the videos. I did look at information that you've sent in the past, and as you said, it's in the courts at this point, our officers, our department does their investigations. They've got a pretty good record in terms of convictions of gun violence, a very good record. In terms of the situation with your daughter, I mean, I can't comment on it because I mean, who am I to know? I'm not trained in it, and
I don't want comments, sir.
okay.
Thank you. We now move to the next question, which is from the NAACP, and representing them is Judge Claudia Barbara. Judge Barbara, who's your question directed to, and what is it?
Good afternoon, everyone. And
Good afternoon.
or evening, and I would like to address this question to the county executive because this NAACP has received numerous citizen complaints about excessive force or police brutality. And we want to get to the root of the problem. So the question that I have for the county is twofold. Are you removing officers from the force with ties to white nationalist groups? And how often, if any, do audits are cops' tickets audited when they're written in Black neighborhoods versus white neighborhoods? If there's a discrepancy, are those officers removed as cops for practicing disparity and issuing tickets on the force, conducting body cavity searches and things of that nature, to stop and search 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 2 hours for citizens in Meade Village and other similar neighborhoods? So the issue really is the concern, the major concern over not equitable policing. The white neighborhoods are policed one way, the Black neighborhoods are policed another way.
An exec comment?
Yes, a lot of officers have been fired for either racist activities or excessive use of force. It happens quickly. There have been a handful since I've been there. I don't get involved in those decisions, but sometimes the chief will let me know without even naming names that he acted on something like that. I did ask the question about what kind of screening there is. And when we hire officers and monitoring on social media, and they do that, and they have rejected a lot of officers, and they have let officers go early in the training process when they've seen those things. But that's part of the background checks and all the social media work as well. As far as the deadly force, in our department, every use of deadly force is reviewed all the way up to the chief. And then there's an early warning system that they have to identify officers who've had multiple complaints that might be overlooked. So, since Altamari came in, I think he's been in 5 years now. I have to say that the performance from what I've read is far improved from before that. And when they've been reviewed by accrediting agencies, the comments have been good. I want to bring in another accrediting group or a review group to look at that again. But I think in this process, people have to bring out those stories, and the police department, police chief has to answer those questions. And that's part of the process that I think we have to go through, is to really for people to be able to make those statements, and for the police department to respond to those statements, and then we make decisions about what we need to change going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person, and for those who are raising their hands and want to engage in the conversation, just want everybody to realize we've got 6 panel members that's going to ask questions. We're all going to open it up. Charles, I did see your hand, and others who may want to ask a question. We want to get through the first panel, then we're going to turn to Facebook inquiries or people who are on Zoom who may have questions. So we're not ignoring you. We just got to get through these organizations who have questions, And the next organizational representative that have a question is Bishop Antonio Palmer, who before he asks his question, he's representing United Black Clergy. I want to thank him because this nice, wonderful computer I have is one of his blessings. Bishop Palmer.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Carl. Also, I just want to take this time to thank the county executive and Mayor Buckley for their desire to have these tough conversations alongside with us. And I do appreciate that. And my question is going to be directed to the county executive. And that is, going forward, what are your plans to implement in the budget to assist African Americans economically in our county, such as housing opportunities, but not just limited to housing opportunities, but also Black-owned businesses? What type of development do you have in place in the budget for funding to help Black-owned businesses?
So all the health and human services agencies have had higher funding than they had in the past. On housing, we created last year a new rental assistance program and put money into a affordable housing production program as well that hadn't been there. But now that we have $101 million in CARES money to deal with the coronavirus, we're putting that money into eviction prevention. We're putting a lot of it into food assistance as well. We're going to have to do childcare assistance. And then as far as business assistance, direct support, what economic development did is came up with a program that is specifically to transition businesses to protecting people from getting the virus. It's the Customer and Employee Protection Grant Program. It just started on Wednesday. In the first 3 days, they got just about $1 million out. That 25% of that has gone to minority-owned businesses so far. We've kept it at 50 employees or less so that it would be the smallest businesses. But Anne Arundel County does not have at this time a specific grant or loan program of its own for minority businesses. And that's something that we're looking at.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. We now have a question from Monica Lindsay, who's representing Connecting the Dots. Monica, your question, who's it directed to?
I'm sorry, one moment, please. There's someone at my door.
Only on live television can you have someone get up to answer the door. I'm going to come back to Monica and going to ask Charles, ask your question very quickly because we're running out of time. Charles James has a question.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Mr. Mayor and County Executive, for all you've done and your dedication. What are we going to do? My question is directly involving police accountability and the types of things that's been going on around the nation. I was recently on a Zoom meeting and I attempted several times with police chiefs to ask a specific question. Is chokeholds illegal in Anne Arundel County in the city of Annapolis? I've never gotten that.
Let's stop. Is that the question? Because that's a direct question.
Is it illegal?
To both the chief, both the county executive and the mayor, or just one or the other? Which one?
Whichever is because it involves both jurisdictions.
Very good. Chief, county executive and mayor. One of the things that was announced just today in Houston by executive order, a mayor or county executive can determine what regulations their police departments will do. In Houston, they made it clear that you will not allow the chokeholds. And it was one other thing I can't recall at the moment. What is the policy from the mayor and the county executive as it relates to his question? Is chokehold permissible?
No.
Wait a minute, no. Is it permissible? Let the county executive answer.
It is not permissible. If it is used, it is considered deadly force,
Okay.
and they're trained not to use it. if they do end up in a situation where they can't avoid it, they have to report it and they have to explain why that happened. But it's considered deadly force, and so and they're not trained to use it. They're trained not to use it.
Mr.
So
Mayor.
is it illegal?
Mr.
That's
Mayor,
what I'm trying to find out.
They will be investigated for it because it goes all the way up the chain of command. What the thing I got from the chief says, and this is online, you can read it, is that there are situations where it happens because of a tussle or fight.
Let me interject. I'm putting a fine tune. I think what Charles is asking, as I just mentioned, the mayor of Houston has said, using the power that he has, he's going to prohibit it from being used. So let me go to a nuance. Would you be in favor, and then same question to the mayor, then we're going to move back to Monica. Would you be in favor of prohibiting the use of a chokehold?
I mean, if it isn't illegal, it should be, because it is deadly force. And so I can't imagine why it would be necessary. I can't say that I know exactly, so I would have to check, but it shouldn't be, and I would be very supportive of that, as I would be supportive that I can't wait.
County Exec? Are you in favor of it or not?
No, I'm not in favor of using it, but it's considered deadly force. And there are times when police officers are authorized to use deadly force to protect life. And I mean, that's exactly what our regulations say, is that
Right.
it's deadly force.
So in Houston, Texas, same circumstance, the mayor, they looked at it, said that deadly force was being used disproportionately against people of color. To take it off the table, he issued the executive order to say it will no longer be allowed. Same kind of situation. The police departments in Houston is no different than Anne Arundel, but the mayor's decided that in that instance, it shouldn't be used.
Well, I believe it's not allowed now in Anne Arundel County. I mean, that's been the response of the police chief on the,
Okay.
when they're the 8 items that, no, we do not allow the use of chokeholds. But when they happen, it's considered deadly force, and that in a dynamic struggle, there can be unintentional contact to that area. And so when that happens, that has to be justified as the use of deadly force to protect
Carl,
life.
can I interject really quick?
No, Charles, the reason I got to move this, we got
Okay.
another panel discussion and we got other people. You'll get a chance during the discussion with the community as a whole. But
Okay.
Monica, you had your question. I kind of went to others before letting you ask your question. Monica Lindsay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to County Executive Pittman. Thank you to Mayor Buckley for participating in this discussion today. My question is for you, County Executive Pittman. So I have heard you on numerous occasions refer to racism as a public health issue, as well as identifying it as a public health crisis. I'm aware that there's a difference between what is identified as an issue and what is identified as a crisis. As such, we had the opioid crisis, the pandemic that we're experiencing with COVID-19. Those resources are a different set of resources than have been identified for racism. So I'm asking you, my question is how will you elevate and provide resources such as similar to what were provided for the opioid crisis, as other counties and jurisdictions has for what they've identified as the racism as a public health crisis, if that's what it is identified as. If it is not identified as a crisis, as opposed to an issue, will you identify racism as a public health emergency / crisis?
So I have done that. Our health officer has to be careful about how he uses words like that have a meaning in the public health field. And we had this conversation about gun violence as well, whether it's an issue or whether it's a crisis. in my view, it's a crisis. No question about it. There's a conversation about whether something that has been going on and on and on and has continued on is a crisis. But I would have to defer back to him about whether the health department is going to call it a crisis, but I call it a crisis. And in terms of resources, the way the opioids was handled is, I think it's a model for how to invest and it was very interesting to me that, when, opioids was affecting more white people, that suddenly the government came in and had an interagency intervention team and put all these resources in, and has refused to do so on other issues. And I think racism is one of those issues where we have to deploy the same kind of resources or more, because it affects a lot more people than we did on opioids. So it's an important comparison to make.
Thank you. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you if you can, I know you're busy, I would like you to stick around because we're going to go into a second phase of something I really think is important. Oftentimes, we look to government to solve the problem, but I think everyone would be in agreement that people themselves have their own solutions. And sometimes it's important for government officials to listen to what people have to say, what they think can solve the problem. We have 3 or 4 panelists who are going to make some short presentations. Then we're going to open it up to everybody online who want to comment and get involved. I want to say in advance to moving into this, we could spend 10 hours on this and would not be enough time, quite honestly. And I would hope people will appreciate that the role I'm playing here in terms of moderator is kind of moving the conversation along to get as many people to participate as possible. So please bear along with me as I try to exercise the judgment of how to get as much people in this conversation as possible. In our second segment, we've specifically asked people who we've invited to make a presentation short, what do they think can be done to eliminate racism in our county, in our nation? The first speaker we're going to have to take a few minutes to put his views out is Mike Miller. Mr. Miller, you're on.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, everyone. I just want to talk really quickly about the whole issue of justice and the fact that historically in this country, the police in America have never been allowed to trample on the rights of what would be considered historically free men or citizens. That's just not the way our system is set up. The problem is that never in America has our jury system or our policing system or our prison system really regarded African Americans and other non-whites as citizens with a capital C. And that's the source of so much of the disparity. So much of our policing goes back to the whole notion of the police as an arm of private sector, always going back to literally fugitive slave acts and other models of protecting property. The specific thing that I want to put on the table in this conversation is that we have a set of laws that are fundamentally and fatally flawed. And at the center of those laws is what's called the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. And what we need is an equal justice and law enforcement bill, which is to say we need not to get rid of that thing called the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. We just need to fundamentally rewrite it so it speaks to how the criminal justice system treats everyone fairly, regardless of which side of the badge they are on. And I think it's important rhetorically that we don't get caught up into, oh, let's just abolish the police officer Bill of Rights, because that's an issue that could easily be demagogued and easily be turned into a soundbite. So fine. We take that law and replace it with something called the Equal Justice in Law Enforcement Act. And I think there are people like Senator Will Smith and others who are focused on something similar. But basically, instead of having one law for how to protect people from being victims and another law for protecting the rights of policemen, let's just have a law that talks about how in law enforcement we respect the rights of persons, respect the rights and set the responsibilities of law enforcement officers. And let's define what a crime is. Right now, it is not an overstatement to say that police departments and policemen, when they are on duty institutionally, are above the law. If you really read the Bill of Rights, which is a state law and not the county executive or the mayor can ignore it, they have to abide by it. Even if they don't like it, they still have to abide by it until it gets changed. It basically has a whole separate system that nobody would recognize on what happens when a police officer is thought to commit a crime. Do they get their Miranda rights? No. Do they get a jury by their peers? No. Do they get questioned? Do they get interrogated? Is there evidence collection? No. There's a whole set of things when you read it. It's all about how to make sure policemen are immune from right and wrong and from law. So whether they're good people or bad people is beside the point. The point is that the law itself does not include policemen on duty in what we commonly consider to be just a basic notion that if you follow the law, you are nothing to worry about. And if you commit a crime, then there are legal consequences, there's evidence, there's prosecution, and essentially you have to go through this arcane internal self-policing mechanism. And only if that system essentially kicks you out of the police system, only then are you subject to the law that other citizens are subject to. And by
Thank
that,
you.
evidence
Let me interject at that point and turn to Dana, who's representing the American Civil Liberties Union. And Dana, looking at what can be done. You're on. Dana Vickers.
Good evening, Carl, and to your participants. It's really an honor to participate in this important conversation representing the ACLU of Maryland. And we really do appreciate the leadership and work of the Caucus of African American Leaders. As I listen to the conversation and your initial question, Carl, what can we do about racism? I think to specifically answer the question, we must challenge and reconsider the policies and practices that were originally designed to perpetuate white supremacy. And until we look at those practices, as the previous speaker, Mr. Miller, was saying, police brutality and the police structure has been around since at least a minute after the 13th Amendment went into effect more than 150 years ago. We know that police brutality is not about, quote, bad actors. It's the monstrous result of a system designed to brutalize Black lives. Last week, for the first time, the National ACLU endorsed disinvestment in police and increased investment in police in Black communities, The ACLU of Maryland is aligned with that position. And for many years, as your participants and members know, we at the ACLU of Maryland have been committed to police accountability, but the influence of the Fraternal Order of Police and our state's culture of white supremacy has blocked any substantial reform. Despite the massive statewide push for police accountability after Freddie Gray was killed by Baltimore police, state leaders would only agree to some very, very minor changes. Now it must be different. We are now working closely with the broad statewide coalition of partners, including many people who have been personally impacted by police brutality and their loved ones who have been killed by police. Collectively, we are taking a moment to fully think through what our demands must be, what impact we can make, and how we'll get this done. Our collective agenda is coming soon, and we will definitely be continuing to work and be in conversation with the Caucus of African American Leaders, listening to other communities across the state, at the state level, as well as locally across the 24 jurisdictions in the state of Maryland, to learn as much as we're sharing what we're working on. We hope that everyone will please stay tuned for and follow our social media channels as we finalize the details of our push on police accountability and ending police brutality. It is going to take all of us to work together on this to make sure that police and other government officials understand that Black Lives Matter and understand how we must move forward. We're committed to that, and we know we can get it done with your support and help. Thank you so much, Carl.
Thank you, Dana. NAACP, oldest civil rights organization in the world. Judge Barbara, specific recommendations, what can we do?
I'm going to be very brief. My recommendations would be starting with equity in policing. Stop racial profiling. Let's put that at the top of the list. Stop it, stop it, stop it. You can police white neighborhoods the same way you can Black neighborhoods. You don't need to target us, stop us on the side, ask us 1,000 questions, and it's not even legal because we're not under arrest, but you're just targeting specific people because they're easy targets, because they're not going to complain to the mayors and to the county executives if they're stopped by a police officer. We need to stop racial profiling. And this is simple stuff. We need to stop presuming Black people are guilty until they're proven innocent. We need to stop these frivolous traffic stops where you're detaining people, doing body cavity searches and things of that nature. And one way in which I suggested, and one of my questions that I raised with the county executive, is that we can transform this system such that, for example, when I was working as an administrative law judge, we're not given a lifetime appointment forever. We're given 6-year terms. We go to a commission, and that commission reappoints us to another 6-year term. And during that 6 years, these police officers can have their tickets that they're writing audited. And we can look at the audited of their tickets to see if there are disparities in the way they are prosecuting or bringing law enforcement against Blacks versus the way they're doing law enforcement against whites. So the issue here is a clear one. There should be equity in policing. And
let me interject at that point, Judge, because I've got to go to Bishop Palmer, who has it, then we're gonna open it up to some others. Bishop, specific recommendation.
Like my question earlier was really pertaining to economics and really targeting Black-owned businesses. And I know that we have to continue to have dialogue pertaining to how that the county can assist in the development and make our Black-owned businesses even stronger. So my suggestion would just be that not only dialogue, but let's see how we can implement a plan to even budgetize and target where we can help grow some Black-owned businesses in our county. Thank you.
Thank you. Reverend Morse. Reverend Morse.
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you. One of the things I wanted to say is that one of the things we need to do is we need to put down, I think, bias. Right now, when I say that, I think our leaders, including perhaps those that have responded, mayor and executive, county executive, when I say put down bias, we are making decisions, or have historically made decisions based on the assumptions that police are right, police are telling the truth, the police in our county are correct. We can't move forward as a community until we lay aside those bias and understand that they are ingrained bias. And they come from when you have the departments that are already in place, that already have perhaps a bias. They're writing the reports that everyone reads. And we don't have as a community a way to address that. We're looking, even if we look at the structure of the way the department is currently set up, and I don't know if you're aware of this or not, when citizens, for instance, make complaints, the complaints go to internal affairs. But what they're getting back is they're getting back a call from people that aren't within internal affairs. So if we can sit down and have discussions is where I'm going. If we can sit down and actually have discussions on how we can make things better as a community, and we hear some of these issues that are actionable, that can alleviate some of the real problems within our community with police, that's the only way we're going to go forward. And that's not putting people on blast. We can start to examine with everyone at the table some of these pieces that can be addressed and are actionable, putting away the bias, looking at the way they do their reporting, looking at the way some of their basic systems are set up for intake, and understand police are historically policing themselves. And not many of us are going to be prone to turning ourselves in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dee Goodwin.
Well,
Any specific recommendation quickly?
I echo a lot of the other individuals that had spoken on racism, but I would also like to add that perhaps they could hire more individuals in higher level positions, minorities, that would provide a different level of culture and ideas.
I'm going to switch to Monica, and just for the public to know, Monica Lindsay's been getting a lot of questions coming from the public via Facebook. I've asked her to group them so that any comments she has can also be related to these questions she's getting. Monica.
Okay, so for me to start off with, as I'm listening to all this, the investment has to be in education, because we're in this moment in history where all of these people are finding out things about themselves, about the world around them, about their belief systems. They have to unlearn a lot of things. And right now, we are in the midst of an epic moment where the county, the city, needs to put resources into helping the community educate itself on what we need to learn, unlearn, gain about history, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, it's all about education. It's all about putting your money where your mouth is as far as education, putting those resources into it so the whole community can unlearn what they need to unlearn, learn what they need to learn, and move forward and grow in this moment and take advantage of an opportunity that this COVID pandemic, as well as this racism pandemic, has caused. So that's one thing. The other thing is there's lots of questions from Facebook because people are very concerned about the elected officials and how they're reaching out to their staff members and their communities right now. So that was one of the questions. I guess, Steuart, if you want to address that, or not, or how did you want to do this, Carl? Did you want me to?
No, just tell me what the question is, because I want to get a lot of responses. I'm gonna come back to the mayor and the county executive, but I want them to get a flavor for what people are talking about.
Okay. All right. So
give me one of the questions that you got from Facebook.
So one of the questions is, how much is the police budget and how does it compare to the budgets for schools?
Okay.
And where does it all go for the police budget? And is there a way to abolish our police and start over? Can we defund the police and put the funds into communities?
Thank you for those questions. I'm going to turn to a specific suggestion. Larry Diggs, I'm actually be very specific and very succinct because I want to get to as many people as possible. But you have a very concrete suggestion that you wanted to put out to the community to consider. Larry Diggs.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, County Executive Pittman, thank you so much, and Mayor, for being available for us tonight and joining us. I have two issues that are principal.
You got to put one forward because we're going to do it to a lot of people.
Okay, it's union protection of law enforcement officers. One of the greatest problems confronting our LEA law enforcement agencies is the police union, which is covetous when it comes to protecting errant criminal law enforcement officers. The union rules for interviewing LEOs when there is a shooting bears scrutiny and revision. Question, how do you feel about addressing that issue with the unions or legislatively to try to turn that around? That is a major problem. 48 hours is too long to let somebody get away with primary evidence in a case. That's first issue. Second one has to deal with residency, which is very brief again, Carl. Another problem is well known that law enforcement officers who do not live in the community lack the sensitivity toward community issues. One of the reasons that residency requirements are non-existent is because the cost of housing is too expensive based on Leo's salary structures. How do you feel about some sort of a tax abatement? Let's face it, if a guy can't pay $1,500, give them a tax, give them an allotment, rather than giving them a patrol car to drive 100 or 75 miles one way home every night with one of the cars that's costing the county or the city money. Give them that tax abatement to move into an apartment, 2-bedroom, or buy a house like they do for the vets. That's it.
Let me interject at that point. Monica, what was another question that you had from a Facebook viewer? Monica,
sign on. Oh.
What's the Facebook question?
Will the county sign on to Obama's policing document? Does our police use the broken window theory when policing?
What I thought that Larry was going to bring up is a recommendation that he had suggested several years ago, which he didn't mention, which was very specific. And so I'll bring it up for the county executive and mayor to give consideration to. And that is when you have police officers who have been convicted of or involved in very controversial cases, like the one that took place in Greensboro, where a young man was killed by a police officer. And that police officer had worked in another jurisdiction where apparently the background check did not reveal that this guy had been involved in this controversial shooting. So whether the police department would be willing to maintain a list of officers who've been involved in controversial shootings, which is already public information, but it would let people know whether the officers that's on the current departments have been involved in these controversial shootings. That was a specific recommendation that was being made at one point by Mr. Diggs, which I thought he was going to raise this evening. Are there another question or comment that people have online on Zoom? And if so, please raise your hand. Steve, go right ahead. This is Steve Wadley from the NAACP.
I just wanted to thank you all for this again. I know the county executive mentioned that some white supremacists were fired from the police department. We need to know who they were and what they who they arrested. And I also want to mention that the Homeland Security Intelligence Unit is responsible for analyzing all crime-related information in the Anne Arundel County Police Department and to prevent criminal activity, and is a liaison to regional, state, and federal intelligence agencies, the Maryland Coordination Analysis Center, and the Joint Terrorism Task Force at FBI. In 2009, the FBI declared that white supremacists were a terrorist organization. They had infiltrated police departments, and I would just want to get your confirmation, county executive, that you will call out, name all the white supremacists that are in the organization, in the police department, have them fired, and then we can resolve the crimes that they have committed if they've violated anyone's Fourth Amendment rights or Fifth Amendment rights or Eighth Amendment rights, so that we can move forward in that way. And I also wanted to say that we need to talk about George Arlotto, and if we're talking about education, we need to talk about how we can have a new superintendent. And finally, I want to say we need to renegotiate the cable contract with Comcast, which you can do, county executive, to remove Fox News. If you want to talk about education and how racists get educated. Right now, they're getting educated by Fox News left and right, and our Hunt Valley friends over at Sinclair are also educating a whole bunch of racists right now. And
Steve, let me interject at that point because we've got a couple of questions. I think they got the gist of it. We had two other people online who had a question. which hands were raised, and I don't see it on the screen. If you've got the question, please raise your hand so I can identify the person who would like to speak next.
Morris. Reverend Morris.
Go ahead.
Okay, and I'm gonna point this.
Ask a question. Got it, because I want to get as many as we can. Go on.
Okay, to the Executive Pittman. Question: when citizens take complaints to Internal Affairs, they automatically get a call back from a police officer that is not with Internal Affairs. This practice seems to be to encourage the callers to resolve matters outside of Internal Affairs. However, the result is that the caller is often, I'm getting to the question, please. The result is that the caller is often immediately intimidated and discouraged because the ones that are complaining about are now the ones calling them back. Can you do anything about that to change that policy, or to start us having a discussion about changing that policy? And can he respond, or is that just a question?
No, it's a question, but I'm going to come back at the end. I'm listening, trying to give as many people as possible. Then there will be a series of questions that I'm going to ask the county exec as well as the mayor. Very specific questions. Are there any other comments that people want to make before we switch back to the county executive? Any of the panel members? Seeing none, then we'll go directly back to these series of questions. County Executive, Mr. Waddy pointed out that there may be members in the police department who are members of white supremacist organizations. First, are they members of white supremacist organization? And if so, what are you doing to get them out of the department? County Executive Pittman.
He's on mute.
Yeah, he's on mute.
Could somebody unmute him, please?
If I got him, I got it.
Okay.
I got him. No, if they are, we will remove them. I think what I said, I don't know of people being fired for being members of white supremacist organizations. I know they're being screened out for being that. They may have. I would have to ask that question. I know that there have been some fired for saying and doing things that were considered racist. If any are a member of a white supremacist organization, they would be fired. I would insist that they be fired. And then the question about flagging officers, there is a system, a state system to flag officers so that you don't hire them unilateral if they've been pushed out of another police department.
Cynthia Carter had a specific question that she wanted me to ask you. She said she's been trying to get a hold of you to talk with you. And one of the things she wanted to do is, on your proposal to look at a civilian review board, are you willing to have citizen input on that? And if so, how do citizens, because you were talking about these various ways this may come about, how would citizens have input? And what are you looking at as it relates to a civilian review board? What's the time frame for this?
Yeah, definitely citizen input. In fact, I'm asking now for citizen input into how we do the process. And while it includes the question of how best to do a civilian review board, it also includes all of the other recommendations of the 21st Century Policing Task Force. So
someone who wants to volunteer, do they send their resume, or how do they, for individuals who are interested in becoming involved?
Well, yeah, I mean, please email me.
Okay.
And not only to be involved, but also suggestions about the process to do this, and about reforms that we can make. But the way I see this is that we've done a process on other things like land use and all kinds of things, and that we need a process on reviewing the performance of our police department. And a part of that is the civilian oversight of it, how that should work. And of course, state law, the way it is now, one thing's possible. If state law changes, then something else might be possible. But like was said before, we have to do it within the state law as it stands now. But that's the question. That's the big question, is what should we be doing in Anne Arundel County in terms of civilian oversight?
Mr. Mayor, you've publicly announced that you're in favor of creating this Community Civilian Review Board. Same question to you. For citizens who are interested in getting involved, how do they let you know that they'd like to be involved? And what's the time frame for your enactment of a Community Civilian Review Board?
So it's very important. It's something that I promised coming into office. When we brought on the new police chief, one of the main questions that was asked of him and any of the applicants was, do they support the Civilian Review Board? So we are moving pretty fast on it. So the best thing you can do is reach out to William Rao. He's going to be the point person on that. He's got a lot of experience in that sort of stuff. We are working the parameters now, but if you don't have his email or number, I'm sure you do, Cynthia, just call me and I'll give it to you. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, there's a follow-up question. You had made the point that police officers ought to be following the guidelines that has been recommended by the health officer. And those guidelines included, as early as today, that people involved in protests should be tested. D. Goodwin made the point that Sunday night, during the demonstration, there were people who observed police officers not practicing social distance, as well as not wearing masks. And you had indicated that you would follow up on that. Does that specifically mean that you're going to issue an order that the police department be uniformed in their action as with the county police department? My understanding is the county police department are required to wear masks, and they do, and they practice social distance. Are you going to require them to do that?
They are required to wear masks in 6 feet. If they haven't been doing that, I have to find out why.
Okay.
That is not allowed. I can't set an example. One of our challenges with City Dock is it's become a focal point for the recovery. We have had, reopened Marylanders come there without any social distancing, without any masks. I'm very proud of the Black Lives Matter movement. All of the protests that I went to, all of us were wearing masks. We were setting a good example. It was completely a contrast to the reopeners. But if our police department aren't doing it, if they're failing to do that, that's a problem. They don't, I've seen them not wearing them around their cars, but if they're 6 feet from someone, they should be wearing their masks, and it's not right. So I apologize. Yeah.
In practice,
And they would definitely have to have a mask on them, because that is a protocol. So that if their mask is in their pocket and they weren't wearing it, but I think I agree with you, D. We've got to. I've seen more than I want to see. I haven't seen them that close, but if you're saying 6 feet, I'll promise you, I'll be on it tomorrow.
they could possibly be asymptomatic carriers, so which would affect us.
County Executive, your health officers have issued guidelines and recommendations for protesters, and protesting is beginning to emerge even greater numbers. What happens when people who are protesting do not comply with the guidelines? Are there any consequences if someone defies these guidelines and come to Annapolis or come to the county protesting? What happens?
So far, we have not arrested or fined anybody for violations of any of the coronavirus restrictions, and that includes businesses. It includes things pre-protest. I've had a lot of people call and say, why are you allowing these protests to happen, but you don't allow certain businesses to open? Or and that's been our answer, is that we're treating everybody the same. We don't want to start in arresting or charging fines at protests. We hope that we don't have to do that kind of enforcement anywhere. What the police have done, the health department have done, reminded people, and we have to continue to do that.
Mr. Mayor, with the oncoming summer and the whole idea of social distance and encouraging people to wear masks, what is the city of Annapolis specifically doing to educate people living in these communities the need to wear masks as well as social distance?
So I can tell you we're producing a lot of masks for kids right now. That's kind of an initiative that's on the table, which I'm excited about that. Definitely a lot of social media stuff to sort of talk it through with people, flyers. We're not policing it. It's hard to be the Corona police. People want us to, and no matter where we are, want us to tell people to wear masks or stay 6 feet. And that's not the law. I mean, the challenge for Stu and I is that the governor stands up there with a couple of National Guardsmen behind him and says, we're going to do this without a lot of warning for us. And then we have to scramble and try to tell people to do the right thing. And it's hard to do that once the floodgates have been opened. You've heard me say this before. It's like you put your finger in one part of the dike and then the water squirts out on another part. That's the challenge that we have, trying to sort of corral people into areas and try to encourage them to do the right thing. So, but it's been a challenge, I can tell you. Yeah.
Thank you. Monica Lindsay, question from Facebook viewers. Do you have a question?
Yes. This was from Facebook. Protesters in the community are making a very reasonable ask of an independent CRB with resources and subpoena power. The police chief's explanation for why he did not want one did not make sense. Why is he or you not listening?
Is this directed to county executive?
Yes.
County executive, were you able to hear the question?
Yeah, why, well, basically, why not a civilian review board? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Well, I think at this point we are listening, and I am open to it, and we need to talk about it. You know, in the past, I have expressed a concern, and the concern was that when I see boards that are appointed by politicians, that they tend to reflect the politicians' priorities. And in Anne Arundel County, which is 74% white and often under Republican leadership, I don't know what a civilian review board would look like. I know the kind of board that I would appoint, but that's been my concern. We have to figure out a way to do something that improves police performance and provides the kind of oversight that I think everybody at this call is looking for. And I've been warned by people who have watched this happen around the country, that there are situations where they have not worked. I mean, Minneapolis has been through 3 iterations of civilian review boards, and they never had good leadership in their police department, and look where it got them. So I don't want to slap a label on something and say we fixed the problem. I want to go through the whole, you know, top to bottom, everything in policing in the county and evaluate it. But it's not off the table at all.
Let me ask you this question coming from the audience. The mayor has indicated that he's made these masks for the city of Annapolis for kids, and presumably he's going to give them out. Is the county planning on distributing masks to its citizens? And if so, when will that begin?
I know that we have distributed some masks. I know that a lot of people are distributing masks. We haven't had a countywide strategy for getting them other than to employees to get them out into the public that I'm aware of.
Okay, let me then switch back to the questionnaire, and I'm going to go to Bishop Palmer. Do you have a question either for the county executive or the mayor? So we go around giving you opportunity to ask a second question.
Yeah, at this time, I don't have a question for him. I think that he was on target with a couple of points that were already asked.
Thank you, Judge Barbara. Do you have another follow-up question?
Well, I do.
And it is?
And it has to do with I'm sorry. I'm trying to get access to my questions here. Oh, here it is. What are you doing today to make certain cops with misconduct backgrounds or who have posted racial slurs on social media are removed from the police force or are not hired?
Who's it directed to?
A county executive?
Okay.
So, yes. Okay. Yeah. I mean, first, let me apologize for the way I'm answering some of these questions. My apology is that my knowledge of how the police department operates is not as good as I would like it to be. That the police chief could answer these questions a whole lot better than I can, because these are decisions that he's making every single day. And he tells me that he moves quickly on these things, and there are, you know, regulations that Jim Spearman can tell you that that the police regulations are pretty thick, and so I'm not very articulate talking about how these decisions get made. I have a certain level of trust that Chief Altamari is serious when he says that that racism isn't tolerated, that, you know, somebody putting something up on social media like that is not tolerated, and that they are asked to leave. But those kind of personnel matters, they don't generally get talked about with names attached. And so I really can't answer very well about, you know, what I'm doing specifically. I'm relying on the police chief to do it. And if I get to the point where I find out that he or any police chief isn't doing it and isn't doing it well enough, then it's time for me to make a correction.
Thank you.
So, Thornell Jones, any follow-up question? Reverend Morris.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And again, I thank you very much. What I'm observing, this question is for Chief Executive Pittman. And what I'm noticing is that we're asking specific questions about the chief who works for you. And we're very impressed by what your answers are, but you're not holding the police chief accountable to anything. So my last question for tonight is this. When questions come to your office with various complaints about law enforcement, I know that you referred the matter to the police, asking them to respond. However, many of the times these citizens report unsatisfactory results. Has your office ever gone back to the police on a citizen's behalf to request a better resolution? And if so, can you share with us one such instance? And thank you very much.
That's a really good question. And I don't have one. I can't think of one.
Well, while you think about that, let me go to
Okay.
another question there. And when you come back, if one comes to mind, Thornell Jones is now up, paying
Yes.
attention.
I'm sorry, I was muted.
Yes.
I want to say that we learned during the pandemic that the school system didn't even realize that they had students who couldn't do homework because they didn't have computers or internet access. So they gave them computers. But the internet access people, the providers, wanted to give them substandard internet access. So those students would still be behind. There would still be an opportunity gap. Let's talk about the opportunity gap that way, because young people who don't get a lot of reading to them when they're from birth, it turns out, because research now shows us that they don't think as fast. They don't learn how to think early. And so it takes a while for them to learn. We need to do something to make sure.
So what do you want? What do you want the mayor or the county executive?
I want the mayor and the executive to work with the superintendent to ensure that from 0 to 5 years old, there's plenty of education to ensure students are prepared for kindergarten. Can you do that?
We'll start with the county exec and then have the mayor respond. Mr. Exec.
Well, if we get the blueprint for education passed, it'll be a lot easier, because they're doing the preschool. And if we get a better childcare system in place, it will help as well, because that's an area where we're going to have to confront. That's a disaster waiting to happen right now. It's already been a disaster. So age 0 to 5, it's hard to reach folks without childcare and without activities. But we do have this connectivity task force that's working. Kay Bodgester Brown oversees it. Pam Brown runs it, and they're looking at the gaps in the technology to get it to the families who need it. Because I agree with you that it's inadequate, and you don't just need a computer. You need the internet access, quality internet access.
Mr. Mayor, a question that's being raised, and it's to both you and the county executive. We obviously are not going to be able to cover all the questions that people have. If people emailed you with specific questions, can you give them a commitment that you will respond to those questions? Mr. Mayor.
I could even make it easier and email the list that I have going to you all, because some people are asking for some data and some case examples. If I generate this list and email it to you, would you be able to respond back so that we could post the responses on the Caucus Facebook page?
Mr. Mayor first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, both said yes.
Yep.
All right, Larry Diggs has told me 3 times and sent me a text and every other kind of way that he didn't think his questions got answered. So I'm gonna ask Larry to succinctly ask the question. I'm gonna listen to both the mayor and the county executive and see if we can get your answer. Now, what was your specific question that you didn't feel either one answered? Larry Diggs.
They feel, okay, thanks, Carl. How do they feel about the National Registry of Police Officer Misconduct, which should any officer that has a misconduct problem or a shooting problem, their records should not be sequestered there or coveted or hidden or placed in a confidential file.
So the idea of having them on a list.
A list. And my perception is that either the NAACP should have control of that because they are a national organization, or the National Action Network should have the possibility of using either one of those national organizations because they're current, they know what they're doing, and they can provide that service.
So the question is, do they favor creating such a national registry? Is that the question?
Correct. Yes, sir.
All right, let's give them an opportunity to respond, because I don't want you to say they didn't respond. You may not like the answer, but you will get a response. Mr. Mayor, do you favor a national registry for police officers who have misconduct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we're going to weed out bad cops, right? We need that stuff should not be hidden, and it'll make for a better police force if we can keep people like that out with that kind of conduct. So absolutely.
Mr. County Executive.
Yes, we've got one for child abusers. We ought to have one for police misconduct.
Mike Miller, do you have a question, Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Carl.
Sure. To both Gavin, Buckley, and Steuart Pittman, have either of you been frustrated in your efforts to deliver on fairness in policing by the current Bill of Rights as constituted? Are there things that you would do locally to make sure there's more fairness and transparency in policing, but your hands are currently tied because of things that are in the state law?
Great question. Mr. Mayor.
So I think, we're trying to address that with a new police chief and a new approach. That police chief was chosen by a group of citizens from Annapolis. He was chosen from 100 citizens. But I think, some of this stuff is slow moving. These systems, institutions that have been this way for a long time don't change overnight. I don't have to tell anyone on this panel that, but we are working to evolve the city. The Citizen Review Board is going to be essential as well as another cross check. I can tell you, putting people in executive positions, diverse people in executive positions is a key thing that we've done. We have the most diverse executive in the city of Annapolis that the city has ever had in its history, and we'll continue to do that so that we can actually affect some change.
County Exec.
Yes, and I do need to, I read Will Smith's proposals for reform very briefly, and I need to go back and read the details about them. But I have heard that even from police supervisors that there are problems there that make it difficult to handle disciplinary situations in the Bill of Rights. We're doing a charter amendment on the ballot. I assume that the council approves it, that will extend the probationary period for our public safety officers, so that it's easier to fire a bad cop who's not cutting it after you've during the probationary period than afterwards. So extending it from 12 months to 18 months so that they have more time on the streets for the chief to be able to evaluate their performance and before having to make that decision. So that adds to it as well. But yeah, I believe that there's a need for some reform.
Thank you. Steve Waddy, question.
I was wondering if the county exec could talk a little bit about the role that he talked about the economic issues going on in the county, and I want to know what he sees in terms of the role of the federal government in the county, private contractors, the military contractors that are here in the county, in improving economic opportunities for African Americans, and making sure that we are not the last hired and the first fired.
Mr. Exec.
Yeah, actually, I think that having the military, Fort Meade, some of the contractors, and some of the what's happened in terms of the growth in West County has actually made our county more diverse, believe it or not. I think that some of those institutions do a better job with diversity than the private sector does. And you can see that in the way elections have gone too. I think that some of that growth in West County has helped Democrats. So I mean, I know the federal government can always do better, but I got to say that they're doing better than the private sector, and probably better than local government in terms of diversity in hiring and leadership in a lot of cases in the military.
Okay, thank you both.
I got a lot of other beefs with the federal government, but we won't get into that.
I want to thank both of you for being on. We're going to, as you know, we begin on time, we end on time. 8 o'clock is our time to end our meeting. I try to keep very focused on keeping people on time. We have 7 minutes to closure, so let me quickly do this. I want to reiterate what I heard so that we all walk away with the same understanding. Monica Lindsay is going to send to the county executive and the mayor a list of questions that were not answered during this particular process, and they have agreed that they will respond back. We will then post for the viewing audience those questions on the caucus's, the answers to those questions on the caucus's Facebook page. So we make that commitment to you guys who are watching. The second thing I wanted to do is Jimmy Spearman's on, and I want to give him 30 seconds to make the announcement. These protests continues to just go on. And for those who thought the protest was over, he's here to tell us that on Juneteenth, there will be another protest. Jimmy, are you still on board? And can you give us the date and the time quickly?
Yes, I am. And I would like to make a minor correction. It is going to be a prayer visual, not a protest.
Okay.
We are going to, I'm with the Grand Hall, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes, I apologize. But I'm with the Universal 14 Masonic Lodge here in Annapolis, and we are coordinating an event with the Grand Lodge out of Baltimore, and we are scheduling on Juneteenth, which is January the 9th, June the 19th at 2 p.m. We're going to have a march from beginning at the Civil Rights Foot Soldiers Memorial on Calvert Street. We're going to march down West Street down to the top of Main Street, go down Main Street in the opposite direction down to the dock and down to Susan Campbell Park, where we will have a series of guest speakers.
Is the mayor and the county executive invited?
That's correct.
Thank you. So
putting it in my
they've been
calendar right
formally
now.
invited. Yeah.
And
Mr. Mayor, will
the
you be able to-
highlight of it will be at 3:45. We're going to take a knee in memorial in memory of the death of George Floyd. Thank
Okay.
you.
Mr. Mayor, the county exec said he'll be there. Will you be able to join as well?
Yeah, I'm going to put it down on my calendar now, so I have to look at my calendar, but yeah.
All right, and also I'm getting a note that there's a protest that will be in Crofton, which starts at 3:30 p.m. tomorrow, and it is at Wedman's in Crofton.
Parking lot.
Hey, pardon?
It's in the Wegmans parking lot. It starts there.
Wonderful, thank you for that, and welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Did the Reverend Whitlock, was
It's
he
a
able
good
to join?
addition.
Was Pastor Whitlock able to join us? We've got 3 participants with hand raised. Would you quickly ask the 3 questions you want? The 3 participants with their hands raised. Very quickly.
I don't have I just want to make a
No,
statement.
the 3 participants with their hands raised. Were you one of the 3? I'm looking at the screen.
Yes, I'm one of the 3.
I just want to
Yes,
make
I'm
sure.
one of the 3.
Okay.
Must be me and D. I just want to make a statement do we understand that a CRB is done with the participation and partnership with the police, but not with them as actual members of the organization? I wanted to know if both our Executive Pittman and our mayor, what they have to say about that, or just to put that message out there. It can't be done without the police.
Well, I think they both were saying that they're in the process of formulating one. I don't think they've actually decided how it's going to be structured.
Okay.
Is that correct, Mr. Mayor?
That's a recipe for failure if it's driven by the police, right? So we understand
Thank
it's being
you.
driven by the citizens.
Thank you, sir. God bless you. Thank you.
D, what was your
Carl,
question?
I have one announcement to make. I have
Well,
right here.
I'm going to get my question.
This will be
Well,
quick.
let D get a question in.
I'm sorry.
Okay, in light of the recent George Floyd incident and the exposure that it provided on police brutality and their disturbing behaviors toward African Americans, I'm wondering how often are the police in Anne Arundel County and Annapolis provided psychological training and such? Because
do either one of you know the answer to that question? If not, I'd ask that Monica included that in so we can post it, because that's a good question. But Mr. Mayor and Mr. County Exec, either one of you know the answer directly to that question?
I don't know the frequency of training, but I know that it's essential for them to have that, and that's all part of de-escalation training, right? If you understand the psychology behind things, we are definitely moving away from a militarization position to more of a position of compassion and trying to understand situations. So I will find out that answer and get back. I'll put it on the answer with how often we do that.
All right.
Carl, one announcement. It'll be quick.
Very quickly.
28th of this year will be the third March on Washington. That's officially from NAN, the National Action Network. They're anticipating 1 million people. The Harford County Caucus of African American Leaders has ordered their bus. So just to make that announcement and give everybody a heads up.
Thank you. August 28th. Thank you very much.
And Carl, this is Bishop Palmer. I just want to make the announcement about this upcoming Saturday Peace Walk in Pioneer City and Meade Village and Still Meadows. Just wanted to make sure we had that on board.
Thank you. What time, sir?
We're meeting at Van Buckley at 10 o'clock a.m. this Saturday.
Let me conclude with this statement. We have not generally on Zoom with the caucus meeting open or close with a prayer. So I want to recite a prayer that was made as we close out this program. It was given by a gentleman who had never, ever been taught with any denomination. He happened to be an ex-slave, and he was asked to pray. And he was asked to pray primarily because of his age. He was the oldest member of this particular group of slaves, ex-slaves, to be released. And he was asked to give a closing prayer. And his prayer, he said, came from his heart. And that God had put these words in his mouth. And I repeat this as we close this meeting out. He said, Lord, we ain't what we want to be. Lord, we're not what we're going to be. But thank God Almighty, we're not what we used to be. And African Americans are not what they used to be. As we see in the coming months and years to come, we're going to see a more energized and more mobilized African American community that will be reflected here in the city of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. And I want to thank all of the participants who got on board. I want to thank all the sponsoring organizations, United Black Clergy, Connecting the Dots, March on Maryland, the NAACP, CAS, as well as the ACLU for its participation in this particular program as well. And to all of you, have a very good evening and be safe.
Thank you, Carl.
God bless. Thank you, Carl. God bless.